I'd like to piggyback off that and say I too am a big admirer of Colonel Milburn's work that he does in Ukraine. I hope you're staying safe there. Are you in Ukraine right now?
No, actually, I'm. That was a beautiful lead, and I'm going to have to deflate you and say I'm in it someplace every bit as dangerous. I'm in L.A., just pulling out of the airport. I expected to have reached my hotel by now, but I had to pull over. I am absolutely safe right now. I'm parked, and very much appreciate the invitation, David and Chris. Great pleasure and honor to be in a discussion with you.
Yeah, great to be speaking with you. I'd like to start off just for people who aren't familiar with who we are and you are. Could you tell me a little bit about your background? Because I know you have a very fascinating international beginning story. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I'll give you. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, so I don't bore your listeners. But I'm not. I'm a first-generation immigrant, as you may have guessed by my accent. I didn't come to this country until I was 24, and the first place that I visited here, I'm fond of telling people quite accurately, was Parris Island, South Carolina, which of course is Marine boot camp. Actually, that's not true. I came through MEPS, that was quite a catastrophic introduction to this country. But to backtrack, you see, I was in a rare position where I could, because I was a dual national growing up in the UK, and they had a Marine recruiter in England at the time because of the US high schools. I was in the rare position that I could join the Marine Corps from overseas, never having visited the United States. I'm sure my recruiter is still laughing. And the reason I did it, by the way, is I was rejected by the British Army. I'm very fond of telling my British Army friends that, is, though they weren't supercilious and arrogant enough, but it is the truth. I broke my leg badly playing rugby, and the British Army gave me, I guess it was kind of 4F category, lowest of the like, you will never get in. But the Marine Corps took me.
It seems kind of fitting that now you're training foreign soldiers to fight in Ukraine.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, it's not what I expected to be doing in retirement.
So can you walk me through how you ended up going from the Marines, enlisting in the Marines, to how do you end up training soldiers in Ukraine?
Well, I joined as a private, as you point out. I made the dizzy heights of corporal, realized I wasn't going to go back to study law, which was my original intention. And so I applied for a commission and went through it's more, I found that the process of making Marine officer, going through that, it was more of a kind of a mental ordeal than it was a physical one. One of the worst aspects of it is everyone is hanging on, because in the Marine Corps, you don't, unless you're a pilot, you don't join with a specific contract as an officer. So you could be put into any job. You could have, having watched all the gamut of war movies that came out in, let's say, the 70s and 80s, as I did, one of my biggest fears was to end up as a supply officer. No offense to the supply officers listening, but I knew clearly that I was not well suited for that MOS. But in any case, I merged the other end as an infantry officer. Was deployed to my first deployment to Mogadishu, Somalia, which is it was kind of a very interesting inaugural deployment, and perhaps set my bar too high subsequently for excitement, because it seems as though, I suppose excitement doesn't seem quite the right word, but I suppose crisis is a better word, because I seem to have pursued them, or they have pursued me for most of the time ever since. But I know I'm answering too much, but I will say one other thing, actually. The hardest part, the time in the Marine Corps that I wanted most to get out, was the quietest period. It was when I was at the drill field in as an officer. And it was so, I found that boredom so depressing and soul crushing. I know it sounds melodramatic, that, I can say truthfully, I mean, being in a combat zone or during a combat deployment, I mean, really one where you're exposed to some degree of danger, it does a couple of things. It gives you, strangely enough, a sense of purpose, and it makes time go much, much faster. So I know I've heard this expression, adrenaline junkie, and someone wrote a review of my book saying I was addicted to combat. I don't think that's exactly the case, but I do think that if you enjoy quite a high bar of excitement in your job, then that needs that need tends to remain with you after you retire.
I
And
can
that's
really
what happened to
relate.
me.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying about that sense of purpose. When I got out of the military, when I got back from Iraq, there's this big void, right? This big
Yeah.
sense of meaning and mission. And I wonder, is what drew you to want to be involved in Ukraine in the first place?
Well, actually, I was a very, very subordinate freelance journalist in Task and Purpose. And that was um, the editor very kindly set me up. I mean, Paul was very charitable to me, and Task and Purpose paid my way out there. I wrote a few articles, and then by then I was in Kiev. Kiev in the early part of March, indeed, all the way through beginning of April, was under siege. I mean, the Russians were on three sides, and those daily, it was getting shelled and rocketed. So not a very pleasant place to be. But what was happening there, you couldn't avoid being caught up in, and that's the way I felt. Remember, this is when the Zelensky was telling the military just to hand out AKs to anyone between the age of 18 and 65. And so we had started training people by then. And when I said we, it was a group of about half a dozen. We'd given them a 5-day training course, and they would drive less, maybe half an hour, and they'd be on the front line fighting the Russians. You just couldn't make that up, could you? Here in the 21st century, it's the most extraordinary story. So I didn't feel as though I could go back to writing, because I wasn't a talented enough writer to change the world. But I did feel, and had been asked to help solve what they saw even then as a training problem. I mean, you had to turn a professional army turned into a citizen army in the space of 10 days. The vast majority of soldiers are untrained.
When we were in Iraq, a lot of times we worked with locals and helped train them. What have you noticed in your experience compared maybe to Iraq or Mogadishu with training the Ukrainians?
Yeah, all of us, and actually that's a prerequisite for joining the Mozart group. We don't demand that you have been in special operations, but we do insist that we only take people in with who have been instructors, preferably with foreign forces. But my point here is that not every good soldier or Marine is frankly a good instructor, and certainly not a good advisor. And you know this, of course, you've been in Afghanistan, because there's an extra step, right? You've got to, it's patience, it's emotional intelligence, all of the above. And the reason why we do it, because the guys that we work with, and I'm talking Americans and our partner nation, we all tend to be very similar in personality. It doesn't matter level of training or nationality. We laugh at the same stuff. It's a phenomenon. And again, it gets back to, because we're all probably drawn together by that purpose. So for us involved in this, it's an extra, being able to train foreign forces, it's a correct term, foreign soldiers, is actually, I mean, it's preferable to training our own, because you learn so much more. The guys we train are brought up in the same institution as us.
So can you tell me a little bit about the Mozart group? And the name is interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about what the mission is and what Mozart group is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm taking a breath because I'm trying to avoid saying that it is a private military company, but I have to say that it is a private military company. But it's also an organization of people who have essentially volunteered, because the amount they get paid is, barely enough to sustain them. So volunteered for a sense of purpose. So try and think of it as an ethical PMC, all right? Crowd-funded, donor supported, and by its own internal restrictions, focused on those actions within the scope of US foreign policy. So you see, to me, that suggests an opportunity for the US government. Hey, I've got, if I can, and I'm not, and this isn't me angling for a contract, but if I can invest some resources in companies like this, then I can do the things I need to do with a fraction of the troops, in fact, no troops, no US boots on the ground, and get more leverage because of the experience and talents of the people that are used. And there's the only potential risk is if those people start doing things that violate law of armed conflict or what have you. Now, that's the biggest nightmare, I think, from a policy standpoint, I would guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my understanding is it's not, there are some major differences between this and it's not a mercenary organization. It's a advising.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't even finish your question yet. So our primary goal or our primary task is to train units of the Ukrainian military who are involved in the fight, either on the way there or coming back with the prospect of going back in. What we do that other organizations don't offer. No, this isn't a commercial bid, but what we do, well, for a start, there aren't any organizations quite like ours in Ukraine, but we offer the ability with the Ukrainian military, say as a customer, we offer the Ukrainian military the ability to conduct regeneration and refresher training, both of which have clear meanings. One is for guys coming into the military to regenerate units, and the other is refresher training as people are pulled off the line. We're doing both of those on a very short timeline and close to the front within artillery range. To my knowledge, there is no other organization, Ukrainian or foreign, doing that. So the second core task is humanitarian assistance, and there's two parts to that. The first is evacuating civilians from areas under bombardment, and by that again, we're looking. We've got to be an organization that's so small. We've got to be one that fills a niche that is distinctive from others. And here our niche is that last few miles, right? Most non-government organizations, in fact, every formal organization that we have come across in Ukraine, and this is not a criticism, their personnel are not allowed to go. I mean, obviously they go into danger, but they're not allowed to. They have to stop short of actually going into a place that is likely to be hit by artillery fire or rockets or missiles. So most organizations remain several miles away, right, out of artillery range. We are the one organization that I know of that goes, and not just into artillery range, but direct fire range to pull civilians out or deliver humanitarian assistance. So someone coined it the Mozart mile. By the way, none of these expressions were mine. Someone came up with a Mozart group and it had already gained traction. I wasn't 100% enthusiastic about it because I didn't want to be considered as, an opposite number to the Wagner group. We're nothing like the Wagner group. I don't, we probably wouldn't even see those guys. But sorry, I was being way too verbose and answering your question.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, we've kind of set up, I understand the different core tasks of the group and some of the challenges. And you mentioned there's always a lack of resources with these kind of operations. What are some of the challenges that you're constantly up against? What are you always kind of butting up against in terms of limitations?
The vehicles. Yeah, vehicles. So we've got as well, so as winter approaches, but even during summer, it's just hard going on those roads. That's an understatement. So there's several problems with that. One is that the vehicles that we're driving, most of them are not four-wheel drive, all right? And then it becomes increasingly necessary, not just because of the weather, but because Russians have dialed in, as we say, they've registered artillery, along all those roads around any of their towns. So, and we've seen this, and we've been very nearly caught in a grad strike. And I mean, they have drones above. It's almost instantaneous. So ideally, we would love armored vehicles that were four-wheel drive. We've had one of the biggest advantages with that, aside from keeping people alive, is the fact that we're not going to shred so many tires. If we go in an evacuation mission and do not shred at least 2 tires, then that is we've been very lucky. I mean, there's jagged glass. There's also the very real threat of running over cluster munitions too out there, which again gets back to having an armored vehicle. I mean, you remember how it is. No one used to drive around in armored vehicles, and then we suddenly realized, why the hell did we do that?
Right. Yeah. With the
So it's
limitation of tracked vehicles, throwing tracks all the time.
So the shortest, materially, that's the shortest resource, but we make it easy. We just say, donate fund. If you donate funds, I can guarantee you every penny is going to be spent in Ukraine. I know that sounds like a sales pitch, but you and I both know that most non-government organizations can't afford to say that, and that we have very few overheads, and every penny goes into one of those core tasks, which I think is worthwhile.
I'm curious about your intelligence picture. Are you in any associate, like talking with any officials in Ukraine or any officials in the State Department to get intelligence on when you're talking about the Mozart mile, the last mile within artillery range of the Russians? How are you mitigating risk? How are you determining where civilians are? How is all this coordinating going on?
It's hopelessly unscientific is probably the best answer I can give you, Chris. And all of us obviously have worked. We're not intelligence officers, but we're very familiar with intelligence requirements. So when I say that, I don't mean that it's sloppy. We go to every effort to find out what the picture is, and then we build up a picture from personal observation of of each area which is passed over between us. So we've got our most valuable intelligence comes from us on the ground, talking to checkpoints, to the soldiers there, soldiers coming back from the front, soldiers on the way to the front. We pick up more and probably several days before Western intelligence agencies. I know that sounds arrogant, but it's just the nature of the way things are. So invaluable. We get. We're not getting official intelligence from U.S. government, but of course we all have friends who will pass the stuff that they're allowed to pass to us about our immediate area. And then we're on Signal. There are 2 or 3 nets that integrate Ukrainian intelligence and the Foreign Legion, Ukrainian Foreign Legion. I mean, when I say intelligence, it's sharing of information, really, but it's focused on information that'll be useful. So there's multiple sources.
Where is the focus of your operations right now, if I can ask? I think maybe I saw you were maybe operating in I'm going to say the name of the town wrong, but Bakhmut, possibly.
Oh, Bakhmut, yeah. So Bakhmut is now actually the center point for the next, obviously the next Russian phase. They've been attacking the town for weeks now, on and off, but they haven't made much headway. So it's been, if you look at a map of Donetsk, Luhansk, you can see kind of it's like checking the dots. Whatever they're one of those kids games where you connect all the dots. They clearly have a line of dots that they've been told to take to ensure that Donetsk and Luhansk are in Russian hands if and when a ceasefire comes.
My point of reference for war is Iraq. We always had air support. There was never incoming artillery. Can you paint a picture a little bit of? I'm guessing this had to have been a little bit of a shock even for you. How different is this warfare?
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, as far as level of fear, it's very hard it's very hard to remember back, and everyone knows that tolerance for fear goes up and down. But I can't say that I have not experienced quite that level of helpless fear as, when you have artillery rounds whistling and dropping around you. I don't want to sound melodramatic, but to me, that's really scary. It's because you are so helpless, right? And that, funnily enough, the sound of artillery falling, I think you'll find is, when you talk to guys who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, will say is the most frightening thing here. That's what the guys in the Legion tend to say too. In fact, I know two guys who had exemplary records in the States quit the Legion after being hit by artillery.
What are you noticing in terms of the difference between the opposition, the adversary, between how the Russians fight versus maybe how the insurgents in Iraq fought? There appears to be, I know you were in Bucha, there appears, what's your assessment on, I've heard a lot about war crimes and just a different type of fighting.
Yeah, it's funny, during the early days of the war, the images that we got in descriptions were very kind of reminiscent of Second World War movies, with partisans attacking German, oncoming German columns as they're moving through France and Netherlands and France. But this, it was surreal. But in that case, it was a very different war. It was a lot of small groups of people who are basically citizen soldiers picking up weapons, to include ATGMs, and attacking the Russians, and the Russians didn't expect it, and it brought to a halt their advance. Just everything's different, Chris. It's the sounds it's much louder, obviously, when you're closer to impacts, and then the aviation thing, constantly having to be concerned. We don't like it when it's sunny. Prefer it when it's raining. It kind of gives us a taste of what our enemies have experienced over the last 2 decades, because you don't want to be spotted by a drone. Drones mean artillery down on your position within 4 minutes, and of course aircraft, it can be instantaneous. And we've been, I can't honestly say we've been attacked twice by Russian aircraft, because there were explosions. I've no idea if they're rockets or not. My face was in the dirt. He could have just been trying to scare us, right? No, but I tell you, even that sound of a jet, knowing that it is not, it does you harm, it means you harm, is so unnerving. I don't think I'll enjoy air shows again.
Have you seen much in the way of anti-drone weaponry? Are those organic to the squads at this point, or is it still a very rudimentary?
For the most part, it is extremely rudimentary, and it involves just blasting away, spotting the drone, and then just everyone blasts away. So the drone gun that it might be a mythical beast, but the drone gun that I've heard about, is evidently effective, but you still have the sensing problem, right? You still got to locate where the drone is, and that's sometimes the hardest part.
I know
And so answer no, it's surprisingly, I know they're experimenting with some stuff, but surprisingly they haven't come up with anything very effective yet, at least nothing they can field down at the lowest levels.
I know we're coming up on time, but I did want to ask you about what your assessment is for what you think maybe is on the horizon for Mozart Group, what you would like to do in the future. Are there ways that you might be hoping to expand or scale in the coming months? Where do you see this project going?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And Chris, if you'd asked me that question just 2 months ago, I would have hemmed and hawed and not really had an answer. And now I still don't have 100% clear answer, but I know all of us, I can say, within the Mozart Group, wanted to continue. But for my part, I want it to be self-sustaining. I don't want to have to rely on donor funding anymore. And to that end, we've already, started to have arrangements with various companies coming in, whether they are insurance companies trying to recover property, or companies just wanting to get a good risk mitigation or risk management overview of the area from guys who are there. So self-sustaining, but still with that kind of sense of purpose. I said like an ethical PMC, not doing anything or getting involved in any conflicts that might be contrary to U.S. foreign policy, even though we will always quite accurately say that we're not working for the U.S. government. And then lastly, I mean, it's unlikely to happen the next year, but the Ukrainian war will come to an end at some stage. I think there will be a huge demand for services like those we offer. Frankly, I hope these will be funded again, because that's been our biggest headache, at least mine, is just wondering how we're going to last another couple of months and trying to raise the funding to do that. So that's our motivation. It isn't getting rich, I can tell you that honestly. Otherwise, none of us would start with the organization. But I would like to have that sense of anxiety about how longevity to go away, and I'd like to continue the mission in Ukraine, but also elsewhere, in other countries, as requested. If we believe in their cause, and of course, it's within the parameters of U.S. foreign policy.
I really look forward to seeing how the company expands and grows. Thank you very much for your time, Andy. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much, Chris. David, all the best.
Same.